Okay, welcome to a Stepping Stones to Awareness interview. Today I'm interviewing Nathan Kirkden. Nathan is going live from Kent via Skype. Now Nathan and I met earlier on this year. He's part of a Pendragon group on Facebook. Nathan is very conversant with common law. He first came into contact with the law situation regarding his own family, and he will now talk about the legal aid situation in the UK today, and we'll move on to the Treason Act of 1351. Welcome, Nathan. Thanks for joining us in very hot Wiltshire today. How are you?
Yes, I'm not too bad. Thank you for having me on.
So Nathan, you live in Kent. You've had several situations where you've had to be involved with the family court system. And what's been your experience as a father?
Well, the last few years, I've had extreme amount of trouble getting legal aid for a representative to actually act for me in court. So for the last few cases, I've had to act on my own in court with my ex-partner actually having legal representation. So it's been rather difficult. I had to undertake basically the task of learning as much as I could, so I could basically, because it's down to me to fight for my son's rights in court. So I had the uphill struggle of trying to learn the Children's Act and statute law to be, how can I say, competent enough to go into court and fight and actually get my son's rights that he has a God-given right to.
So over the years, we know that legal aid has been cut back. And I think you said to me earlier on today, there's only 5 situations where you can get legal aid now. So, I mean, this must be hurting a lot of people out there who are watching the show tonight. So that gave you the impetus, I guess, to start researching and, you know, representing yourself. And then you got involved in the common law court system and common law cards. So for the benefit of the people at home, would you like to just give a brief chat about what you've learned through the common law system? Because we've already had John Smith interviewed a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling us about how the court system was now up and running.
Yes, well, my initial interaction, my initial acknowledgement of common law was when I was actually speaking to a barrister that overheard a conversation with me and my ex-partner's solicitor, and they was kind enough to come over and point out a law called the Malmontine Law, Law 51.
Sorry, what? Could you just repeat that to me, Nathan? What was that law?
Malmontine Law, Law 51.
Right. Okay. And when was that? When was that produced? When did it come into effect?
The Malmontine laws form the basis of, it's sort of the original part of our constitution. It's very, very old. I can't off the top of my head remember exactly when it was enacted, but we're talking the more obscure laws that we have in our constitution, in common law.
Right.
But to go on from that, basically I just started reading, and it became quite clear that there is a clear definition between common law and what you call parliamentary statute, because statutes aren't actually laws, they are parliamentary policy, and policy and statute is actually policed and how can I say, enacted on, what's the words I'm looking for, they're policed by consent and they're enacted by consent. You have to know about jurisdiction and admiralty maritime law and common law courts and the difference.
And of course, when we were talking earlier on today, I was talking about my experiences with a lawyer, and he was saying that Parliament was sovereign, and this is where we have a wide divergence of opinion, because a lot of these lawyers have been trained after a particular year when common law and certain matters have been removed from the lawyers' books, even though you'll speak to, for example, I spoke to Dominic Grieve MP a few weeks ago, and he will say, no, the common law hasn't been removed. What's your experience, Nathan?
Well, there's only 3 things that are sovereign in our lands. That is the land, the people, and the crown. And I don't mean the person, I mean the headdress, the symbol. It's like a badge of office, if you will. It's the same as when police wear badges on their clothing. That is actually a badge of office. The crown is a badge of office for our royalty. So they're the only three things that are actually sovereign.
So that's sorry, go over that again. That was the Queen, the people, and
the land.
The land, right.
It's the crown. It's not the Queen. The Queen is not sovereign.
Okay.
The crown, the headdress she wears, is sovereign, which is, once that is bestowed upon her, that's what bestows her sovereign powers.
Right.
It's only the person wearing the crown that is basically given the powers. The same as the people and the land. Parliament are not sovereign. We lend Parliament our sovereignty.
That's
so we
right.
are sovereign, and we say we give you the job to act for us. And in doing so, when we vote for an MP, we are giving them powers of our sovereignty to act on our behalf. Parliament is not sovereign.
So leading on from that, you know, we're talking about treason now, because I've been reading a few articles in the last couple of days of what actually the Parliament has left behind over the summer recess for us to mull over. And, you know, it was on the news last night that the two RAF bases, Linton-on-Ouse and the Red Arrows one, they're going to be sold off. And we've got 7 courts, which I think you've got a list of, are going to be closed. Which of those 7 courts, Nathan?
If you give me 2 seconds, let me just pull it up. Sorry, I've got to go to my phone. The courts that are actually being closed are Banbury Magistrates and County Court, Blackfriars Crown Court, Chorley Magistrates Court, Fleetwood Magistrates Court, Maidenhead Magistrates Court, Northallerton Magistrates Court, and Wandsworth County Court.
And you see, this all comes on top of so many police stations now being shut, more courts being shut, the military being sold off. And yet I was listening to UK Column on earlier today, and they were saying how between 2015 and 2017, we gave away lots of armaments. We actually gave them away to Jordan. So on the one hand, I see that the government says, oh, we've got to do this cost cutting and shut and sell off. And yet, on the other hand, we seem to be giving more and more aid to other countries. We're giving away military bits and bobs to Jordan. I mean, does anybody believe the government anymore? And this is where I sort of move on to treason. What is the definition of treason? Because I think we've been looking at some of the links, haven't we, tonight? And we maybe could put a couple of those up. So treason.
Well, the definition of treason spans over many things. It started with the Treason Act of 1351. That is basically just to do with sovereignty, the King and the Queen, and actually go against them. It's the amendments later on that we should really be talking about, because they're the ones that have actually sort of taken it a step too far. I mean, technically they're not only unlawful, they're actually illegal. Because we'll be talking about the succession to the Crown Act of 2013. But there's precursors to this. In Tony Blair's reign of 10 years with Labour, he actually amended and, from what a better word, played about with a lot of human rights acts and certain bits like that, which prevented a lot of laws being enacted, made, being kept up by regal authorities. He done a pretty good job at sort of subverting the treason laws. That's why, technically speaking, most of the governments haven't, because I don't know many people know this, but we can't actually go to war under our constitution in this country unless the Queen signs off on it. But because of Tony Blair's amendments to a lot of things, it enabled Parliament to set up a war cabinet. It meant they could sign off on going to war, but they wouldn't come under the Treason Act.
Right, so he's basically arrange something on the side, if you like, to bypass the Queen.
Pretty much, yes.
Wow. So why are our MPs not talking about this? Is everybody's obviously keeping quiet and stum about it all. And now, just by these sort of shows, are we going to get this information out to a wider audience? So Tony Blair, for somebody who I think in early years, he didn't want anything to do with the EEC and the European Union, he made a very, very quick turnaround, didn't he, to becoming the leading advocate for membership of the EU. And so
yes, he did.
He's basically subverted our constitution, and the Queen has presumably allowed this to happen. Did she have any say in it, or don't we know?
Well, technically speaking, the Queen has actually signed many, many documents, the Lisbon Treaty, etc., things like that. The EEC Act, 1972.
She signed it off?
She signed them all, yeah. Which is basically gave power to it in a way, which is basically, especially the ECA Act 1972. I mean, it gave powers of government in this country away to a foreign party, which by our constitution is not allowed.
And of course, you see, a lot of people would say that when we went into this triggering of the Article 50, that was unlawful because we should have just repealed, annulled that 1972 Act, and we wouldn't have had this pantomime, this charade that we've been subjected to all this time.
Very, very, very true. I mean, entering into the European Communities Act was unlawful to start with. Ted Heath signed that without actually notifying the people. I mean, to sign that, we've slowly been given away, well, Parliament's slowly been given away our sovereign rights. That's why EU laws are starting to affect us in this country. That's why we're being told by the EU what we can, what we can't do. I mean, there's one main difference people need to understand about mainland Europe and Britain. On mainland Europe, the easiest way to explain this is you can't do anything unless a law tells you you can. But in Britain, you can do pretty much what you like unless the laws tell you you can't.
That's a really good explanation, actually. No one's ever come on the show and explained it that way before. So how do I answer? I mean, I was talking to a lawyer a couple of nights ago who I'm actually going to have on the show in a couple of weeks' time. And I said to him, he was saying, well, May's got to go and we'll replace her by Mogg or someone like that. I said, why is it going to make any difference? I said, we're not going to get Brexit anyway. And he just doesn't seem to understand, our understanding of common law, going through this pantomime. What would you say to him if he was in the studio now?
I'd ask him to read the Magna Carta and read the part where it says, and all these rights are given in perpetuity. Basically, we have a thing called the Magna Carta 1215, and it sets out all our rights, our sovereignty, and the fact that this cannot be taken away without our consent. For instance, just to go back to an earlier point, when Ted Heath entered us into the ECA 1973, he actually gave away our sovereignty without our consent. And every MP and every member of Parliament since, because you've got to remember, they all get sworn in on by our Constitution. So to understand our Constitution, they would directly, straight away understand that what we're involved in and what is happening is against our Constitution. It is unlawful, it shouldn't be happening. But they've gone along with it, so they are complicit in breaking the law. They're all
complicit. As 650 MPs are complicit, which moves me on to the point we were discussing earlier about the amendments of 2013.
Yeah.
And you said to me, what did you say to me, Nathan?
If you like, I shall read some of the amendments that have been put in for the succession of the Crown Act 2013. This comes under. I'm trying not to throw loads of acts and statutes at amendments out because I don't want to bore people. But I shall read out a little excerpt from the succession to the Crown Act. It's compassing the death of the sovereign or the sovereign's wife or eldest child and heir, violating the sovereign's wife or the sovereign's eldest unarmed daughter or the sovereign's eldest son wife, only if the eldest son is also heir to the throne, levying war against the sovereign in the realm, adhering to the sovereign enemies, giving them aid and comfort in the realm or elsewhere. It also goes on to a bit more.
Didn't we say something along the lines of we couldn't do our MPs for treason in 2013?
Yes, well, what's actually happened is in the amendment in 2013 of the Succession to the Crown Act, it's actually put in there that...
was that Tony Blair? No, it couldn't have been Tony Blair in 2013.
No, this has all been happening after.
Right.
This
so
is
he
a lot
started
to
the
do
ball
with,
rolling.
Yeah, this is a lot to do with people sort of... I mean, you're not meant to bind your successor, but it seems there has been either a lot of binding or there's a lot of complicitness involved in this, because this has been happening over the last 20, 30 years at least. But in the amendment in the Succession of the Crown Act, it actually sort of puts in there that not only are we not allowed to, which is basically, in a nutshell, to try and give layman's terms, it stops us from petitioning the Queen, it stops our sovereign right to deny a successor to the crown, because people don't understand this. If we don't like a king or a queen, we have the sovereign right to say no, and they don't get to become king or queen.
Really?
But they have taken that right away.
So they took that out in 2013. Because that's interesting, 2013, because of course the barons petitioned the Queen in 2001.
Yes.
So they could lawfully do it then?
Yes. I mean, in the it's in the Magna
Carta they can do it anyway.
So no parliamentary act or act by the Queen can take that away, because it's there in perpetuity.
That's right.
To give us remedy for tyranny. So if Parliament or the Crown put us under tyrannous actions, that we have the Article 61, the right to lawful rebellion, as a remedy. But what they've done with the Succession of the Crown Act is they've made it a treasonous act to go against the Crown, to go against or to try and stop any of her, for lack of a better word, consorts, basically, the people who advise her, advisors. It also puts in there as well about us, making it treasonous for us to go against Parliament.
Right. Okay. So now that puts us in a difficult position, because how do we remove that? I mean, this is man-made after all.
Yeah. I mean, would you like me to read the actual bit I've just said? I can read it in its own wording. Just so pretty. According to the law in force, this is from 2030, it is a treason felony to compass, imagine, invent, devise or intend to deprive the sovereign of the crown, which is our sovereign rights to deny the sovereign of the crown, to levy war against the sovereign in order by force or constraint to compel her to change her measures or counsels, or in order to put any force or constraint upon, or in order to intimidate or overawe both houses or either House of Parliament. Just to explain that in some layman's terms, some people, basically, in a nutshell, in our constitution, we have the right to deny the crown to a successor. If we do not like that successor, we believe that the successor will not do the job good enough, we have the right to do that, the sovereign right to do that. The same as with Parliament. We have the sovereign right, because it's our sovereign rights we lend to Parliament. So to make it a treasonous act for us to try and overthrow them or somehow change their measures, it goes against our constitutional sovereign rights.
Right, okay. So, where do we go from here?
Can I just add one more bit, please?
Yeah.
There's also a little bit to this. To move or stir any foreigner to invade the United Kingdom or any other country belonging to the sovereign. Now, I'm not sure if people are familiar with the Barcelona Declaration of 1995.
Yeah.
But technically speaking, they are contravening this very, very end section.
The Barcelona Agreement is where they're intending to allow lots of people from North Africa into the country.
Well, technically speaking, it's more to do, the North African one come after. The Barcelona Declaration 1995, pretty much the EU guarantee the acceptance of Islam, and it enters into a deal with Syria and a few countries like that. Basically, in a nutshell, it says we are going to guarantee by law, by the use of media and a few other things, that you will be accepted in these countries.
Right. Okay, that's a lot of food for thought for the viewers back home.
I mean, I think it's very food for thought. When you're talking about they've made an agreement some over a decade ago, before they started allowing the immigration to Europe, and they'd already agreed that once the immigration starts, they're going to use laws, the media. So we're talking about the BBC, Sky News, things like this. They've already guaranteed that they are going to make sure that they're accepted. We're
accepting. So basically, when I hear people, especially people from the Conservative Party as it happens, say that we are going to get some sort of Brexit. And the thing is with Brexit, as I understood it, when I stood as a Brexiteer, the whole idea was to have our own, to regain our sovereignty, whether it be to have impact on immigration, trade deals and so forth. So it was interesting to hear an article, or read even an article with Campbell Bannerman's name mentioned today, saying he felt that people who were very closely aligned to the EU should stand trial for treason. Now, Campbell Bannerman is the MEP who has been charged with producing a trade deal, the Canadian super trade deal, which basically aligns us totally with the EU. And I'm thinking, the irony, does he not realise that he's going to be the first person that's closely aligned to the EU in his book?
Well, yeah.
It's laughable, isn't it?
He's pretty much put his own neck on the block with that one, for what a better expression.
Okay, well, I think there'll be quite a few of us lining up to sort these MPs out. So going back, so let's go on to the common law courts then, because we have to find an alternative. And as I say, I had John Smith on the other week. He told us about the courts that had already been convened and the remedies that had been implemented. Do you see it being a problem implementing the remedies?
It shouldn't be, no, because so your viewers know, the highest laws and highest courts in this land are common law courts and common law. Okay,
which can be held anywhere. They can be held in any type of building.
As long as it's a secure place, yes, and you make provisions for the court and the proceedings, then yes, technically speaking, yes.
Yeah.
But the common law courts, and was basically the problem was with a lot with common law in the 50s, it was removed from the bar exam. So most judges, most barristers, most solicitors are not trained in common law, and a lot of us, and it's quite a clever subversion from the government, because often you'll see, when you see the word statute, it'll be statute law. Now, statutes aren't laws. We have statutes, believe it or not, in our own constitution, our own common law. They're there to fill in the grey areas between laws, but they are not allowed to contradict the law, or any law for that matter. So most of the statute laws that the Parliament have actually passed are actually unlawful and illegal in the same way. But lawful always sets a precedent over legal. It's always law, statute, act. That's the way it goes. So they don't understand at the moment that common law is the highest law in our land. They're starting to, and a lot of people do. I mean, if you look at MPs like Jacob Rees-Mogg, for instance, he can quote the Bill of Rights in Parliament. So he must know about the Magna Carta. They're all classically trained, so they will be taught about this, obviously Runnymede, Magna Carta and certain bits like that. I'm pretty sure most of them are quite good at Latin, so they'll be able to read the original anyway. So to not understand our sovereign rights and the very laws that are given to us in perpetuity, i.e. To give a cross example, the weights and measures within the Magna Carta, there should be one set of weights and measures throughout the land. I don't know if many people are aware of this, but there was the metric martyrs case.
Yes.
Not too long ago.
Was that Sunderland? Hartlepool, somewhere around there, wasn't it?
Yeah, Sunderland. which actually set the precedent, the fact that our common law cannot be overridden by EU statute law. Well, EU statute, you shouldn't even call it a law. It's a parliamentary policy that it's policed by consent.
But they ignored the common law, didn't they? And those people were tried and criminalised.
Well, they actually won the case. They actually won the case because common law supersedes all the laws. So the weights and measures should stand.
It should stand.
It's a clever subversion by Parliament and our media, believe it or not. We've been slowly but surely trained to believe that they have the power, we don't. But the problem is what people need to understand is we employ them. They work for us. It is our sovereignty that they are using to do all this. So we have given them our sovereign powers to act on our behalf, and they're not acting on our behalf. I mean, to give a case for that, how many times has the MPs or a political party given a manifesto that you voted on based on that manifesto, but once the parties got into Parliament, they changed that rapidly?
I was going to say they never adhere to the manifesto anyway, do they?
No. Well, that's a misuse of your sovereignty. It's what you call malfeasance in office.
Well, I mean, what people, whilst people are looking at this pantomime about Brexit and sovereignty, they're forgetting the fact that the Infrastructure Act of 2015 was passed in time for, there was a Queen's speech. And people probably remember the 5p on a carrier bag, which was in that same speech. But the small print was far more important in many ways, because this now allows the government to sell off all our public land, our parks, our beaches, our mountains, our forests, to private ownership. Subvert the will of the people again. And so we've now got a situation where fracking, we've got the first government go-ahead, the big business has won, they've been given a licence, and now they can frack on public land. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that don't know whether fracking's good or fracking's bad, but the fact of the matter is that big business is in charge in this country today, and our MPs are merely puppets.
Yeah, they're what you call complicit.
They are. So they're a waste of space, aren't they? Quite frankly.
Pretty much, yes. They haven't been doing best by us or doing our will for a very long time. I mean, to touch upon your point about the small print, we're getting into contractual law here, and full disclosure. Most people don't read the small print of a contract, and this is where most people get bound by it because you don't read it. Full disclosure means anything that comes of that contract needs to be disclosed at the first point. So when they're talking about selling off our lands, selling off our fields, our forests and things like that, there should be full and open disclosure of that contract and its ramifications, which to my knowledge wasn't quite there. I mean, to touch upon the EU thing, full disclosure, our entering into the ECA 1973, there was no full disclosure, which makes it an unlawful and illegal contract by our very laws. It's quite a simple step. Knowing that and knowing the Magna Carta, we can actually void this. All it would take is our Supreme Courts and our High Courts to actually make an order to say that this act is voided, even if it's just under contractual law. The fact that it unlawfully goes against our sovereignty should be enough anyway. So we have enough now to completely wipe out the EC Act and the Communities Act just by the fact of full disclosure, because what happened is they gave away our sovereignty without our consent. And we wasn't made aware of that. I don't know if people are aware of a document called the FCO 30/1048, I believe it is. It's a document where loads of civil servants and many people across the country got together and decided what implications going into the Communities Act would have on us. And in that very document it states loss of sovereignty. This was put under the Secrecy Act for 30 years, and it actually states in the FCO that this should be kept from the people for as long as possible.
Well, you know, listening to the UK column today, they're talking about children's homes. They're going to have secrecy over them for the next 50, 80 years. And we've got the likes of Melanie Shaw incarcerated, and we'll probably never see her out of prison again. This is happening time and time again. People need to be aware of what our government, they're never going to be our friends, never ever. And the Brexiteers movement has got to realise that in actual fact, the Brexit MPs are actually worse in many ways because they're wolves in sheep's clothing. At least with the Remainer MPs, they're being honest in a way. They want to be part of this cabal, and it's the Brexit MPs, they're actually deceiving us more than the other side. So on that note, Nathan, I was going to call you Luke then. Nathan, how can we finish off? We need to give the people at home some hope for the future, because after all, there's more of us than there are of them.
Well, people need to start believing themselves and the power they hold within themselves. This is what we first need to do. So whether you're a Brexiteer or a Remainer, you need to understand that the power lies with you, not with Parliament, not with the EU, not with the Commission. The power lies with you. Use your rights, learn your rights. For instance, your common law rights, your constitutional rights, because that's what will save you and your future generations. To give an example of this, how we've been subverted, because we've been led to believe this, and because we're silent, we're actually complicit. So because you're not standing up saying, no, I don't agree in this, you're actually complicit with what Parliament's doing. So you need to start having a voice. You need to start saying, no, this is my rights, this is our constitution, this is what I want. And we need to be vocal about this. We need to start believing in ourselves, because it is us that has the power. They've just made us believe over many, many years with TV and certain things like that, that we don't have the power, they do. Well, they're wrong. And there's many groups on Facebook, on the internet, and around, not just in our country, but in many other countries that are bringing this forward. You need to understand your rights. That's the main thing. We've become a nanny state where we're being slowly micromanaged by Parliament. More and more and more. People have to, for want of a better word, people have to stop being lazy now. They need to understand these for themselves. It's not hard. Common law, technically speaking, is no loss, no harm, no injury, and there's a little bit of fraud in there as well. Once you understand that, so if your intent is to cause loss to someone or their belongings or something, then you're in breach of common law. If your intent is to cause harm to someone or their belongings or anything to them, that is in breach of common law. If your intent as well, intent is the word you need to remember. If your intent is to cause injury to a person, their property or their belongings, for instance, then you're breaking common law. Again, you need to learn what you call jurisdiction as well. With the police don't actually have jurisdiction over you unless you break a common law.
So you don't have to give them your name if you're just walking past them or convening?
No, as I said, statutes are policies. They are policed by consent. So what you get tricked by is what we've been tricked by a lot, like you said with the small print. It's what you call contractual law, where you give your name. It's usually your legal definition you give over. You give over jurisdiction to the police to act upon them statutes upon yourself.
Well, I think it's time now that people who are watching tonight wake up and realise that we are not leaving the jurisdiction of the European Union in the next couple of years. You know, the laws, the regulations, we're accepting all of them. I see no evidence whatsoever. In fact, it's going to be worse than useless, because we will become that vassal state, and it's basically been done from the inside of our Parliament building. The civil servants and the MPs are being complicit. So if anybody's in any doubt, seeing all these courts being sold off, MOD, RAF stations being sold off, and so on, you can see this gradual decline of Great Britain, and it saddens us, doesn't it? Because we wanted to leave behind for our children, you know, a better future for them, but not under this present government, and we will now have to take back control, eh, Nathan?
We will, yes. Most people need to understand this. We all want it best for our grandchildren, and the hardest thing for people to understand is you've been tricked.
Yeah, and there's no conventional political party that is going to save the day. Not at all. Anybody who did any maths at GCSE will know that it's not going to work.
Yeah, not through the ballot box as things stand. I truly don't believe that, because if we could do it through the ballot box, then we would have had Brexit straight away.
Yeah.
What we need to do is we need to start using our sovereign powers. We need to start using our constitution and common law. That is the very weapons we have against any tyrannous government or any tyrannous parliament. I would refer people to Cromwell against Crown.
We've got tyrannous courts. I was talking to a gentleman yesterday, and he was saying he'd been into a magistrate's court, and the magistrates were imposing some fake warrant or what have you on the guy, and he said, no, you've given your oaths to God. He said, I want God in here now. I want to speak to God. I want to pray to him in front of you all. And they said, oh no, you can't do that. So he got on his knees and he started praying, and the magistrates actually physically ran out of the court. So that will be an interesting interview as well, I think. So Nathan, thank you so much for coming in tonight and talking to us all and explaining what you're about and how the likes of you, myself, and lots of other people out there now are getting to know what our rights are and how we're going out into the streets to take back control. Thank you so much, Nathan, and thank you to everybody listening tonight, and I hope you watch another Stepping Stones interview very shortly. Good night.